In 1776, the American colonies declared independence from Great Britain. They fought the war to 1783, and they won. This allowed the colonies to open up immigration over the Appalachian Mountain. Many will tell you that we fought because of taxes without representation, and that'd be true, and other things. But the big thing for most people, at least those Scotch-Irish that had come to America in the new colonies, they wanted to get over that mountain, the Appalachian Mountains. The king wouldn't let us do that, and that held back commerce. But there was one man that was an outlaw, and that was Daniel Boone. Now, you got to know about Daniel Boone to know about Chapter 1, Doublehead and Park, Incorporated. In 1784, Daniel Boone and a man named Filson produced his autobiography, was shared into Europe, as well as the colonies. More people came from Europe, and they began to arrive in Boston, Massachusetts, New York City, and Maryland, and Baltimore. From 1784 to 1794, new immigration swamped over that mountain into Indian land, the Shawnee, the Cherokee, and the Creeks, and the Chickasaw. Now, the Cherokees were led by two different chiefs. There's the upper town and the lower town. The lower is Doublehead's clan. His brother was named Coon Shoot, Standing Turkey. He also had a younger brother named Pumpkinhead. The odd thing about Doublehead's family is the name. You got a turkey and you got a pumpkin. In between is Doublehead. It doesn't make sense. Who named Doublehead and why and when? It couldn't have been at birth. And a lot of times an Indian would change their name as they grew older. They would be named for what they were or what they did. Now, we understand turkey. He's probably a good turkey hunter. But Pumpkin Boy, that's an odd one. And he's younger than Doublehead by 2 years. What's up with Pumpkinhead? We're told that Doublehead really loved his younger brother, Pumpkinhead. It seems to be some attachment that maybe Doublehead kept him out of trouble. I'm kind of thinking because he had a big head that maybe he wasn't all there. It's not always about the size of your head. Brilliant people can have small heads. So here's the way Jonathan returned Meigs, being the Indian agent that dealt with Doublehead on a day-to-day basis in 1805 and had known him for years. And here's what Meigs wrote. He is a man of small stature, compact and well-formed, very dark skin, and small, piercing black eyes, the fixture of which, when engaged in conversation, are as immovable as diamonds set in metal, and seem to indicate clearly that he comprehends the subject, and in his reply to an address will omit nothing that has been said. He is occasionally guilty of intemperance. He drinks too much. And then off his guard, oddly enough. And if he considers himself insulted, the explosion of his passion resembles that of gunpowder. And as an alcoholic, I can understand. He was 61 years old when Jonathan Meigs wrote this. He was an alcoholic. At 61, if you're an alcoholic, you're tired and you're angry. Doublehead was born in Kentucky in 1744 to Redbird. His Cherokee name was Talotisk, though he was recorded as, stay with me here, Chukalakalaka. I prefer Doublehead. Most Indians are known by the name they are given or earn. The Cherokees were no different. Now, whether he was bipolar, may be a question. But he was obviously an alcoholic, and he was Doublehead, hence bipolar. In 1793, as the new settlers moved in to the Indian lands, particularly into East Tennessee, towards the Tennessee River in Alabama, the Cherokees, particularly those in the lower part, those being the Chickamauga, that's in today's northern Georgia, along East Tennessee into northeast Alabama. That's where Doublehead's people were at. You got to keep these people off our land. They've been told by the government, we'll keep them off, but they hadn't. Coon Shoot, Turkeyhead's brother, Standing Turkey, was the head of that clan of the lower Chickamauga Cherokee. And they did battle, and Doublehead learned everything he could from Standing Turkey. Now, sometime in 1793, Doublehead's favorite younger brother, Pumpkinhead, was sent on a scout mission outside Knoxville. He was killed. This inflamed Doublehead. And so began Doublehead's revenge. This was outside Knoxville. Even Knoxville, at this time, had a newspaper. They didn't have paved roads, they didn't have running water, but they had a newspaper. And that newspaper was their communication with the outside world. These newspapers were printed and sent back over the Cumberland Road to Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia Inquirer shares the following in regard to Doublehead. Among the deputation from the Cherokee Nation to Congress, which the Philadelphia Printer styles respectable, and they did that in quotation marks, is Takaluka, alias Doublehead. This is the first mention of Doublehead. He was a signer of a treaty, and he was the first to violate the treaty. He killed the two nephews of General Seaver. Seaver was Tennessee's first governor. This is a big deal, and then began to kill more. The Enquirer goes on to list almost every 2 or 3 days the murders and the robberies and stealing slaves and stealing horses and burning people, burning cabins. And this goes on all year. And one of the ones that draws your eye is on the same day, the 16th, a party of Indians fired upon 5 men near Mr. Andrew Jackson on the south side of the Cumberland River. They killed 1 man and wounded 2. And that goes on to name some of the men. John Bosley, they burned John Donaldson's house. That's Andrew Jackson's father-in-law. They killed Widow Hayes. This is the first time Andrew Jackson comes into view. It's the first one I found with him in a periodical. He was just a new lawyer living outside French Lick, which was Nashboro. His father-in-law was John Donaldson. We'll get into that later. Doublehead's revenge finally came to a head. He finally finished. And this is how they put it. Doublehead's finished. Bledsoe's Lick, that's another salt lick. And this being above, to the east of Donaldson and the Hermitages and Andrew Jackson. And it says, on June the 5th, 1795, old Mr. Peyton was killed, and a black slave, doesn't say male or female, belonging to Mr. Parker, was wounded in a field of Mr. Bledsoe's, near Bledsoe's by Doublehead's Chickamaugas. By 1795, the minor Cherokee chief, Doublehead, had shed more blood by his own hands than anyone in America, most of it from the Over Mountain people. The Over Mountain people are Scotch-Irish. The Scotch-Irish came from Great Britain. They couldn't live on the coast because of the tycoons. They get pushed out into the frontier. That's where you put the people that fight, and they fought their way into America. You don't hear about them as much because the tycoons are doing the newspapers back in the East. These Over Mountain men, they're hard-headed people, and that's Doublehead. That was his enemy. What persuaded Doublehead to end his war? Well, Jonathan returned Meigs. That tells you what happened. An Indian agent. That's Doublehead's agent. That's the guy that gave Doublehead the money. They made a treaty with Doublehead. They gave Doublehead thousands of dollars and his own land, Doublehead's Reserve. It runs from Cypress Creek in Lauderdale County to Bluff Creek. That area now is Florence, and to the left and the right, this was Doublehead's Reserve. He made allies, or tried to. He contacted the Creek south of him, the Chickasaws to the west, the Shawnees in the north, the Choctaws down in Mississippi. It was a vague alliance, but he was thinking, we're going to make this our land. Unfortunately, he's an alcoholic and he's bipolar. So at 1795, you've got your own land in Lauderdale County, Alabama, to be, and you're making an alliance. Your nearest Indian ally would have been the Chickasaws. They're downriver. Now, downriver, the Tennessee goes basically from the west to the east and then turns sharply to the north running towards Kentucky. It runs uphill. This will get confusing, so you gotta listen and you gotta watch. Colbert was the chief of the Chickasaws. He had aligned with the Americans during Doublehead's rampage. They were a small tribe. They came out of in today's Mississippi, but they also owned the land that is today's Waterloo, Alabama, where the Tennessee River begins to flow north. So Doublehead, to form this alliance, married 2 of Colbert's daughters. That became a problem. He beat one wife to death, and the other there's really no other mention of, so you can only assume it was bad. However, the alliance remained between him and Colbert. From the Lancaster Intelligencer and Journal, June the 4th, 1800. Washington, May 12, 1800. By an officer of the United States Army who passed through this town on the 7th instant, from Knoxville, we are informed that a war is likely to take place between the Cherokees and the Chickasaw Indians. The cause of the dispute is said to be that a Chickasaw chief, Colbert, erected a ferry on the Tennessee River at the crossing from Orleans to Kentucky. A chief of the Cherokees, Doublehead, sent word that he would erect a ferry on the south side of the river. The Chickasaw, Colbert, replied that he would take his scalp if he attempted it. The 2 tribes have taken up the quarrel and, as our informant says, are preparing for war. The thing about these articles in 1800 is the talking about ferries, and it tells you everything that's going to come on. Colbert built a ferry, and they placed it at Waterloo, Alabama, today's Waterloo, Alabama. That's where you had the Colbert Shoals. We'll talk about shoals later. Downriver or upriver, which is Doublehead, he wanted to put one up what sounds like to be at Gravelly Springs maybe, or somewhere around Cypress Creek. It's hard to say, but that was a problem. Now they worked through it. There was no war. And I think what happened was the United States intervened. The Tennessee Gazette, Wednesday, October the 22nd, 1800. Now, friends and brothers, this is written by J.W. Winchester, a Tennessean. You may be satisfied that your father, the President of the United States, is ever mindful of the rights of the red people and will not suffer his people to intrude on your land or other property contrary to existing treaties. The ferry at the mouth of the Bear Creek was established by your people, who alone have profit from it by the United States. And it is with you to establish any other ferry in your country or let it own as you please. He intervened between him and Doublehead, and that averted a war between the Chickasaws. And would the Chickasaws have won? They may have. The Chickasaws were known as a warlike people. When they wanted to be mean, they could be mean. Now the Cherokees, led by Doublehead, he had more men, and he had a lot of half Indians. But again, he was a drunk by now, and he's not going to be leading military. He was rather comfortable. He had built him a place on Cypress Creek, and Cypress Creek will become a big deal later. So who were the Colberts that owned this ferry? Here's the Colberts. George Colbert was the son of a Chickasaw woman named Minta Ho and James Logan Colbert, who was a Carolinian of Scotch-Irish descent and lived with the Chickasaws at a young age. He may have been captured. I don't know. Some think that James Logan Colbert was born in the Carolinas, traveled with Indian traders, and at an early age stayed with the Chickasaws. His son George was born on the west side of Bear Creek, that's in Mississippi, across from Waterloo, Alabama, that being what will become Eastport, Mississippi. It's where the Tennessee empties into the northeastern corner of Mississippi, this being by Walker in his book, Doublehead, Last Chickamauga Cherokee Chief. There's a newspaper article written in 1803 that fully tells you what we're looking at. While passing through Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Cherokee nations of the Indian, on the trace through Chickasaw Nation in the neighborhood of McIntosh, named after a British agent, there observed a horse gristmill, large fields, well fenced, cultivated, abundance of horses, cows and hogs, corn and provisions in great plenty, and here we bought from the Indians the best cured and sweetened bacon we found on the road. There are a great many white people in this neighborhood, among whom the agents act as magistrate. According to the laws of the United States, the half-breed Colberts have great property in civilized lands and Negroes in this nation. The great military road on the north side of the wilderness extends 15 miles southerly from the garrison on the river of Tennessee below the Muscle Shoal. Rested 2 days and a night at the Cherokee named Doublehead. This town on the south side of Muscle Shoals is understood that it supplied the American garrison below the shoals with beef. It's noteworthy Doublehead has moved to the south side of the Tennessee River. Colbert is on the north, Waterloo. Doublehead superintended and assisted in the operation. The men of the town worked in a body together, similar to what are called frolics in an American neighborhood. More about frolics later. While we were there, they were making and repairing their fences, which they did very accurately and strongly. Substantial rails, paying attention to the regularity of the worm or angle. They went from house to house and field to field, finishing everyone's fences as they went. The abundance of victuals being provided for all the company by owners of the field they fence. It's a frolic. We lodged at the house, Doublehead's own house. He had a kitchen and a household furniture in good order. He had different shelves of plates, bowls, teacups and saucers, copper tea kettles, tin coffee pots, churned butter and proper churn, with a dasher and lid and fried meat and baked bread for us, and set our table with plates, knives, and forks. But they continue to use, especially among themselves, the large Indian spoon. Need a big spoon. This woman and her husband were dressed in strong, substantial cloth spun and wove by her. Doublehead had 3 wives. 2 of them came from Colbert. The other survived. Never really any word about the Chickasaw wives. They disappeared, but he did have children. As we go through this, we're going to look for the reasons why they killed Doublehead. I think this is one of them. The dust-up between the Chickasaws and the Cherokees basically had to do with where the ferry would be. Where that ferry was is where they would make money. The American government got involved in this. They straightened it out. They did a treaty. In November 1801, from the Tennessee Gazette, it was recorded this: "We hear from the Chickasaw Bluffs that the Chickasaw Indians have agreed to the cutting of the road from this place to Natchez, that being to Waterloo. By a gentleman just from the Creek Nation, we are informed. The Cherokees were holding a talk with respect to the expediency of going to war with the Chickasaws. It seems the dispute arose concerning the land at the Muscle Shoals on the Tennessee River. They both claimed the land, and the Cherokees, having settled their own, were ordered off by the Chickasaws. They refused to go, saying they would fight for it, upon which the Chickasaws declared they should. So enters Jonathan Return Meigs, the Indian agent. This informs what happened. A treaty was drawn up for these two chiefs to separate them. They both got an annuity. They didn't publicize the annuity or how much. They didn't even tell the Cherokees how much they were paying Doublehead. However, it came out. So a treaty was formed, one for the Chickasaws and one for the Cherokees. In it, Doublehead's annuity was $5,000 a year, about the same as $100,000 to us. The Chickasaws agreement was for $2,100 today. These things weren't known at the time. Colbert surely didn't. But what would happen? Doublehead had sold out the Cherokee. He got him a house, nice cabin, women, slaves, horses, hogs. He got it all. But the other Cherokees, they lost all of their land in East Tennessee, North Carolina, and basically were pushed into northern Alabama. Well, there's creeks down there across the river. To the left is Colbert and the Chickasaws. How long this would hold? You can't see it lasting. Doublehead had caused his own trouble. He didn't know. He was bipolar and alcoholic. He was happy. He was 61. He's got at least one wife. He's beat two to death probably. He's got grandchildren at this point. They all know he's a problem. So this is what we come to. From Edinburgh, Scotland, the Caledonian Mercury, November the 2nd, 1807. Knoxville, Tennessee, August 15th, 1807. On Sunday night last, one of the chiefs of the Cherokees tribe of Indians was shot in the head by some person who, unobserved, entered the house of the chief where he then was and who puffed out a candle. He blew out the candle. Doublehead was removed from the house in the neighborhood where he continued to live until Monday morning. A party of 5 Indians, supposed to be in league with that person who had shot him, discovered his place of concealment, fired balls through his head, and beat it to jelly with the butts of their pistols. Circumstances fix suspicion on a suspicious settler. Blame it on the Tennesseans in the nation and a contriver of his death. There's more to this story than just this, obviously. What's not being told is, in August of 1807, before his death, all the Cherokees got together. They're gonna have like their equivalent of, it was basically stickball. So it's soccer with sticks and you hurt people. They used to use skulls. Nevertheless, all the Cherokees got together. And that's when they witnessed what Doublehead had done to them. Doublehead had a lot of strikes against him. Some even claim he was killed because of what he had done during his massacres on the frontier. During one raid, his brother-in-law had taken a young boy child captive, put him on his horse. Doublehead came up to him, pulled the boy off, and proceeded to beat the child's head into jelly. Now you gotta tie the two together. They started calling him Baby Killer behind his back. We called him Doublehead. They called him Baby Killer. It's apparent this is what happened at the annuity party. At the stickball games, his friend, Bone Polisher, approached him. Though no one could interpret what Bone Polisher was angry about, it was reported that Bone Polisher accused him of betraying his brothers by accepting Meigs' $5,000 and selling all of the land to the Unica. That's the white man. With that accusation, the compadres of Bone Polisher grabbed the bridle of Doublehead's horse to prevent him from leaving. Doublehead, sensing an ambush, he wasn't stupid, pulled his pistol. Bone Polisher swung his battle axe. It hit Doublehead's hand. obviously trying to fend off the blow, and it cut off his finger, took off his thumb. You need your thumb. It's hard to fight without a thumb. Doublehead was enraged. He fired his weapon into Bone Polisher, and that killed Bone Polisher, blew his head apart. And so Doublehead went back to his cabin on Cypress Creek, and then they came and got him. So in 1807, all of this information is coming through Knoxville, going to Scotland, going to Ireland, going to Nashville, and going to Knoxville, and now we come to Joseph Park. The Knoxville Register, Tuesday, September the 11th, 1798. All persons indebted to the subscriber for any dealings in his store formerly kept at McBee's Ferry are earnestly requested for the last time to come forward and make immediate payment to James Parks, Joseph's brother, merchant in Knoxville, who is duly authorized to receive the same. It is hoped all concerned will pay attention to this notice, as nothing else can prevent the disagreeable recourse to impulsive measures. Signed, Joseph Park, July the 20th, 1798. The Parks were running a business. They had come in from Baltimore, proceeded into the interior of America, ending up near Daniel Boone's family in Pennsylvania. The father of James and Joseph remained in Pennsylvania for the rest of his life. The brothers, there were 3 others. They just spiraled on down into Tennessee. It looks like they all took a destination. For instance, Joseph came in through Knoxville. He was leaving Knoxville in this article, trying to get all his money together to go to Nashville, which is becoming a place. In 1804, Joseph Park was in Nashville. We know this because the Tennessee Gazette, August 29th, 1804. Joseph Park begs leave to inform his customer and the public that he has removed his store to Mr. Coleman's new brick house, next door to Mr. Potter's, where he just received from Baltimore a fresh supply of merchandise consisting of dry goods, groceries, hardware, stationery, etc., which, as usual, he offers for sale at the most reduced price for cash, merchandisable cotton, beeswax, flax, tow linen. He flatters himself that the superior quality of the goods and low prices will meet the attention of the public. Nashville, 20th of August, 1804. Joseph Park was running with some pretty big league people in Nashville. Coleman was one of the first mayors. In Nashville at this time, if you're seeking ways to put your money to work to make money, you'd be looking at horse racing. Horse racing was big in Nashville. Andrew Jackson had a huge farm of the horses at the Hermitage. Somehow or another, Joseph Park got involved in horse racing. From the Impartial Review and Cumberland Repository, that's in Nashville, Saturday, March the 21st, 1807. The noted running horse, Doublehead, will stand the present season commencing on the 10th instant and ending on the 10th July on R.C. Foster Esquew's farm 3 miles southeast of Nashville on the Jefferson Road, and will be let to mares at $20 if paid in cash within the season, or $25 paid in merchandise, ginned cotton, at the market price for the first day of January next. $10 the leap, paid within the season, $40 to insure a mare with foal. Blue grass and clover pastures, well enclosed, with constant streams of water passing through them, will be furnished gratis, and those who wish their mares fed shall be accommodated at the price of grain. Every attention will be paid to mares. No responsibility for accident or escape. Doublehead is a beautiful bright bay. 5 years old this spring, so it'll be born in 1802. 15 hands and 3 inches high, was got by the noted and imported running horse Diomede, who is thought to be the best horse in the United States. His dame, of the Janus strain, is a mare of great power. She may be seen at Doublehead's stable. It is deemed unnecessary to swell his advertisement with a detail of Doublehead performances on the turf. They are too great to admit of exaggeration and too well and recently known to need further authenticity. Joseph Park. Doublehead was still alive at the time of this advertisement by Joseph Park. There were other articles in 1807 that mentioned Doublehead. Tennessee Gazette, Saturday, March 28th, 1807. Taken up. A Negro man about 55 years of age or upwards, about 5 feet 5 inches high. He says his name is Sampson and that he belongs to Hudson Alford of Tennessee, Wilson County, Cedar Lick Creek. The Negro likewise says that he ran away from Doublehead at Muscle Shoals. That's Florence. The owner is required to come pay charges and take him away. William Dunlap, 2 miles west of Duck River on Natchez Road, February the 22nd, 1807. Now, that's an odd thing, but here's one from earlier. the Tennessee Gazette, this is in 1804, was brought to the cantonment on Tennessee River the first by Doublehead, one bright bay mare, about 14 and a half hands high, 8 years old last spring, as a small star in her forehead, branded on the near shoulder and off buttock, appraised to be $75. That's an expensive horse back then, because they were going for 10 or 15 if it was just a wagon horse. Owners desired to prove his property, pay charges, and take her away. William Simmons, lieutenant. William Simmons at this time was called the Ranger. Tennessee was big into horse racing. Somebody had to keep things straight. You couldn't just get a horse and call him a name and go, I'm a racehorse. Ranger had to keep the records. This becomes a big deal in Tennessee. A lot of money to be made. One reason why Andrew Jackson's always getting in fights. Simmons, the lieutenant, was a ranger of the county. Basically all of Davidson County, which stretched down into Maury County, in today's Maury County. The ranger was in charge of horses, all horses. He kept the names. If you were a racing horse, you had a name. If you were a wagon horse, you didn't have a name. What we know is Andrew Jackson owned the horse Doublehead. He's the one that sired him. Out of whichever horse he's had, it came off Diomede, and he knew the mother's name. Joseph Park had to have bought Doublehead from Andrew Jackson. The Ranger kept that record. The horse apparently had done some racing before 1807, though there's no print of that. Joseph Park goes to a lot of work to explain how popular and famous this horse was. I don't know if he's talking about the Indian or the horse. Nevertheless, his idea of Doublehead grew into a business, and he continued this business for years. The Ranger only knows, and the Ranger kept the record. Partial review in Cumberland Repository, May 12, 1808. Dear Sir, I have received an order from General Andrew Jackson in which I receive information that the Creek Indians in considerable force are encamped on the south side of the Tennessee River, Bear Creek, amounting to about 450. That on the 3rd instant they attacked Colbert's Ferry, killed 2 men and wounded 3, one of whom is since dead. It is therefore necessary to prepare for the worst, and by way of precautionary measure, you will without delay repair to this place, and by all means in your power, ascertain the strength and position of all those marauding creeks. You will employ Chickasaws, who are our allies. You will ascertain, describe the situation of the frontier in that quarter. What force would be necessary for removing the banditti, and with confidence, I expect a statement to your proper authority. The assurance of my esteem, Thomas Johnson. Collected the following information from Captain William Outlaw, that between the 1st and middle of March, 500 Creek Indians passed down the Tennessee. Down being, they went north. Here's where it gets interesting. About 3 months prior to the 500, 14 came on. They scouted up and down the north side of the Tennessee River. The north side means west of the Tennessee River. They went to Mossick. That's a fort in the upper, just past Paducah, to get powder and lead, which they could not obtain. They were extremely insolent to the whites. Sometime before the attack on Colbert's ferry boat, they disappeared and have not been seen since in the neighborhood of Dover. Dover is below Fort Massac. It's on the Tennessee-Kentucky line. And here's where we find out. Nance, a Chickasaw squaw who fled from her own nation and married Stephen, the captain of the party of 14, stated to Captain Outlaw that a very large party would come down about the time the leaves grew thick, that 7 nations smoked the war pipes and were to surround and make an attack on the white in conjunction with the British, that when the 7 nations spoke together, the Chickasaws and one other nation, which Captain Outlaw did not remember, but thinks they were the Choctaws, that would be an important thing to remember. It was probably the Creeks, were invited to join the Confederacy, but refused, saying the whites were their friends. Let them have money when they wanted and purchase their lands when they wished to sell. The Chickasaw squaw, the day before it was discovered that Martin was killed, who's Martin, who states to him that the Creeks had killed 2 white men, and this summer the Creeks and Cherokees would join together and shoot Unica, meaning the whites. Too much. Nance stated to Captain Outlaw that the parties, the one consisting of 500 and the other of 100 Indians stationed on the small river, that being Bear Creek, the south side of Tennessee, the south side of the Tennessee River, 3 miles above the mouth of Panther Creek. This is 1808. Our family reunions were at Panther Creek. That's 2 miles above Bear Creek. I didn't know that. That's true. Panther Creek was named as early as 1808. According to our family, our family was established on Panther Creek in 1809. Well, that can't be right, or can it? The question is, how long has there been family or a presence on Panther Creek? And obviously, forever. It's got great creeks. It's got springs that bubble up off the hills. So why wouldn't Nance be on Panther Creek? But here's what Captain Outlaw found out. The report continues. Smoke has been seen and reports of guns heard in that direction, south, within 2 weeks past, from receiving this alarming information. They continue. It was stated to me by several persons that Nance, the Chickasaw squaw, informed him that Martin, who was the first white man killed by the Indians, was decoyed by the party to the south side of Tennessee by representations made of the number of beaver which might be entrapped on that side. When he reached the other shore, he was murdered and robbed of beaver skins and other property which he then had in his possession. What made Nance say this? Why was she trying to start a war? Because we're going to find out that the Chickasaws were allied with the Americans. Nance wasn't. She didn't like the Unica. Oddly enough, she probably named Panther Creek. She may have wanted to be the Panther Clan. Chickasaws all had clans. Eagle Clan, Wolf Clan, Panther Clan. Was Panther Creek named because of the village? Nance's village? Who was Stephen? Just out of the blue. Who's Stephen? He's obviously Nance's husband. He must be the leader of this group. What William Outlaw didn't know, nor did Andrew Jackson, a chief named Tecumseh from the Shawnees had been paying a visit down south. He was not known at the time. You'll find out in 4 years, in 1812, who Tecumseh is and what he's been doing. But here's what had happened in early 1808. There had been a sign in the heavens. It must have been a meteorite or a comet, but apparently the prophet, Tecumseh's alcoholic brother, the prophet, saw it, and it told them beforehand. And this was a big deal. So Nance is seeing things happen. She doesn't like the white men. She didn't want the beaver hunter on Panther Creek, and she told him to go down to Bear Creek and get some beaver. And the beaver trapper wouldn't have thought anything was wrong. She's a Chickasaw. They're an ally. And so he got killed. This causes trouble. He had family. Nothing ever became of this. The 14 squaws that traveled up the Tennessee River, or rather down it, going north, they never show up again. You don't hear anything about them. The creeks, they just basically fade back into the background. But what we know is this. Over the next 4 years, Tecumseh's busy. He's talking to Choctaws, Creeks, Chickasaws, and Cherokees. He's building an alliance, and this will all come to a head in 1812, in the War of 1812. But first, there's Tecumseh. This is before Great Britain went to war with Americans. So what set Nance off? And Stephen, who is he? Well, William Outlaw and his bosses did some more investigating, and this is what they came up with. Here's a report of Thomas Swain. This is Outlaw's boss. He says, famous Mortimer is an intelligent and I think a man of veracity. He stated, this is in regard to the deaths below Duck River and the Indians that fired on Colbert's boats, in which famous Mortimer was in command. He says, 7 men were in the boat, Mortimer's boat. 2 were killed and 3 wounded. The Indians kept up constant fire. Who loaded their weapons? Squaws? Were squaws taking shots? There's 14 squaws and 14 Indians. They chased Mortimer. He saw a party of Creeks. How he knew they were Creeks, we don't know. 13 in number who made their attack on the boat. 13 in number who made their attack on the boat. Colbert conversed with them. Colbert's talking to them. First they denied Colbert, but a Cherokee, one of the party, acknowledged it. They then confessed, observing that they had now killed one too many, but were not satisfied. Colbert reported he had been in the Creek camp, and they said they were for peace, and would not go to war with the whites unless Bonaparte, the French, did. That party who made the attack on the boat had not lived in the nation for 10 years. That party who made the attack on the boat had not lived in the nation for 2 years. If that's the Chickasaws, is that Nance? And the act was unauthorized by the nation. The Creeks, the Chickasaws, we got a renegade group out here. Here we go. It was stated to me by several persons that Nance, the Chickasaw squaw, informed them that Martin, who was the first man killed by the Indians, was decoyed by the party of 14 to the south side of Tennessee. on representations made of the number of beaver which might be entrapped on that side. And when he reached the other shore, Bear Creek, he was murdered. Nance and Stephen may have moved too fast. They were obviously up to something, and they were telling something was going to happen, but it never happened. You can see over the next few years, Chief Colbert at Waterloo is concerned. His people are getting angry about Doublehead's reserve, which by now, since Doublehead has died, is filling with white people, with Americans. He tries to contain it, but he can't. He apologizes, he makes excuses, but there's definitely something amiss in Colbert's camp. As the years proceed, Ohio and Tecumseh and the Prophet begin to make news. We get to 1812, there's a threat of war with Great Britain. Tecumseh knows this. He begins shifting around looking for more allies. He's back down around Panther Creek, all the way down into Mississippi. There's reports of him everywhere. He leaves the Prophet behind, and he goes and he makes deals. So the story picks up. It picks up in 1812, in April, again spring, from a Knoxville newspaper. 4 years later, this article pops up out of Wilson's Knoxville Gazette, and it says, from Dover, this report. Dear sir, since I put my letter of yesterday in the post office, there has been a fellow brought in who appears to be half-breed and either cannot or will not speak any English. He has on a shirt and a hat which is supposed to belong to the man who had his house burnt. We have committed him to jail. He appears not to be void of sense, but will not, by sign or other ways, make an endeavor to give satisfaction, although he can make signs enough to make us understand what he wants to eat or drink. This fellow proves to be one of the gang who has done mischief. It will show the propriety of routing them from their new town or harbor, rather than where they convey all their plunder. This fellow was taken last night 10 or 12 miles from the Tennessee River on Long Creek, in a neighborhood whence 4 years ago several valuable horses were stolen, which proved to have been taken by the Indians, which Indians we don't know, and were got by the owners near the Muscle Shoals. I am in haste to be your obedient servant, R. Cooper, Postmaster, Dover, Tennessee. This is what the report is about. April the 5th, 1812. Dear sir, considerable alarm has been excited on our frontier by a party of Indians. They've committed depredations on the Tennessee River. On Friday last afternoon, came to this place. The Indians had robbed a house on the preceding night of a barrel of whiskey, and that morning had alarmed the family, still thinking that probably it was one of their drunken frolics. They had a lot of frolics. They're building houses. The colonel being absent, I only wrote to the nearest captain to meet me with a few men and obtain an accurate information respecting the business. I found they had burnt down his house and corn crib, ripped up and emptied flat feathers out of the beds, taken all the household furniture he had, shot and tomahawked 6 head of cattle, which were all he had. I had him extended on oath. His name is McGehee, and a man by the name of Ross, who lived about 300 yards from McGehee, below the bank of the river. They had taken some time ago a barrel of whiskey over to his house on Thursday evening. Mr. Ross was not at home. His wife, being alone, went up to McGehee's, that was her brother, to stay all night. There was considerable disturbances during the night, dogs baying in the morning. He went out, he saw a number of moccasin tracks around his house, and then he went down to Ross's and found the beds lying in the yard. Whilst examining the scene, he heard a number of guns fired off at the mouth of Sandy River, which is exactly opposite his house. He discovered 2 canoes, which he had at his landing, were missing. The firing still continued, and he positively asserts in the space of 15 minutes, more than 100 guns were fired. The Indians then proceeded, hallooing and shooting across the river. The morning being very foggy, he could perceive the canoes only from the flash of the gun. He asserts there are a considerable number, but from my examination of their camp and the landing place by it, there does not appear to have been but 2 landed there. I am induced to believe these Indians, here's where it comes in, these Indians to be the party that infested the frontiers here a few years ago. As I informed, they were banished by their nation and have built a small town near the head of Sandy River. I have just heard Tecumseh, the prophets, are on the waters of Tennessee with 300 warriors. If this information is correct, we may expect warm work this spring. Interesting because it mentions frolics. Let you know everything that's going on along that Tennessee River. Now, they're not supposed to be on the west bank. That's still Chickasaw land. This is 1812, the spring of 1812. But apparently up and down that river were frolics. So many frolics going on. Captain William Outlaw was not all that concerned. Guns were being shot off all the time. There's a lot of drunk people building houses. They were having fun, dancing. That's what they did. You want to build a house? You hold a frolic. To hold a frolic, you better have whiskey, you better have a barrel. And we find out by this report that the same group that was doing all that nonsense back in 1808, the 13, 14 squalls, they had a captain named Stephen, and now we're going to find out more. One day later, this report is expanded on. They bring in Captain William Outlaw. He knows it all. This day personally before me, William Outlaw, one of the justices of aforesaid county, that being Stewart County. They brought in their prisoner, and Outlaw is going to talk to him. He examined the person committed to jail on suspicion of having been with the Indians who did some mischief on the Tennessee. That fellow says he is a Spaniard, but was taken to the Creek Nation when he was a boy and has lived with them ever since. That he came to the Tennessee River from a new town, not 2 days' journey from Dover, with a party of 200 Indians, and was with the party about 20 men who burnt a house opposite the mouth of Sandy River. Now, Sandy River is in Humphreys County. They killed cattle and they recrossed the Tennessee, and a day or two after the whole of the Indians crossed the Tennessee in different parties with a view of stealing horses and plundering. He was paid by an Englishman to spy out the country for the Indians, that being Tecumseh, and was to meet them again on Sandy River, not far from this new town. This fellow speaks several languages, but chiefly talks French, sworn to before William Outlaw. I'm sorry, I won't read everything all the time. I don't sound like Morgan Freeman, nor do I read like him, though I resemble Sam Elliott. Nevertheless, how did we get to here? We went from Doublehead, a bipolar alcoholic Cherokee, a racehorse, all the way down to a squaw named Nance in Alabama, not yet Alabama, Panther Creek. How did we get here, and what's the thing that brought us there? Here's the thing, it's Andrew Jackson. Jackson married into money, Donaldson money. John Donaldson was the pioneer that founded Nashboro, Nashville. They lived just outside of Nashville. They had a boarding house, oddly enough. It was a cabin. So when Andrew Jackson got there early in the 1790s, before Doublehead started his campaign of rage, he spent the night at John Donaldson's house, and he met Rachel. Rachel was already married. Her husband had left her. This would cause trouble. They did get a divorce from the previous husband, and then they married. However, they did live together without the divorce. That's a big oops, apparently. I don't think so, but they did. Not everything is known about what Jackson was doing in these early years of his marriage. We do know this: he liked racehorses. He gambled a lot on his racehorses, and he had a pretty good stable. And that's where Doublehead came from, the horse. He was Diomede's foal. Of course, there were other foals. There was another horse that Jackson owned named Truxton. Truxton had a race with another horse called Plowboy. Plowboy was owned by Charles Dickinson. Well, the race was planned, but it never went off, and the horses didn't show up, and it's all real odd. They explained it this way and that way, and then they also, at some point, they throw Rachel into it. That the end of the story is there was a duel because Jackson got mad, and he killed the best shot in Nashville. Shot him through the thigh, perforated his bowel, and Charles Dickinson took a day to die, and it was ugly. This made Nashville mad. Now, Jackson already had a reputation. In 1801, 1800, he had threatened the governor. That was John Seaver. Everybody liked John Seaver because John Seaver really was a Revolutionary War hero. Nevertheless, he threatened Seaver. Seaver said, sure, come on. So they met between Knoxville and Nashville. Well, back then you would have seconds, and they would bring the pistols. John Seaver's second lost his horse. His horse got away. He had no pistol. But they showed up to the site, and Andrew Jackson's pissed off. And he wants to kill Seaver. Well, Seaver's son's with him, and at the end of the day, John Seaver hides behind a tree. Jackson draws down on him. The son draws down on Jackson. There's a whole lot of talking. Nobody gets killed, and they go their separate ways. However, 5 years later, Jackson does it again, this time to Charles Dickinson, and the perforated bowel, and it's going to bleed out on the bed, and it will also go into his presidential campaign history, and not in a good way. So in 1806, Jackson, by the way, got shot right here, and part of that bullet broke off, or the bone did, off his rib, And how they knew this, I don't know. But the bone was stuck in his heart. I imagine some guy put his finger in there and said, hey, there's a bone in your heart. Doctors are kind of like lawyers. If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, you just were. I digress. So, in 1806, Old Hickory goes back to the Hermitage, stays out of the bars, no more saloons, no more hotels, for at least a year, maybe more. He's not a popular person. He's not making good money as a lawyer. And so it must have been in this time frame that he sold Doublehead. Doublehead had been foaled, obviously, in about this time frame. He needs money. Joseph Park buys him. And obviously, he's Diomede's foal. Everybody knows that, right? Who named him Doublehead? I think it was Joseph Park. So then it's 1807. What happens in 1807? Doublehead in the summer is killed. Now, that controversy still rolls. It's kind of like Kennedy, the JFK thing. Who killed JFK? Who killed Doublehead? They say other Cherokees because he had taken their land, he had sold them out. Was it Bone Polisher's family? He had killed Bone Polisher, blew his head. Or was it the brother-in-law that got mad because he had basically beat that child's head into jelly, the baby killer? Those are the three that you really hear about the most. But I think Colbert obviously, Doublehead beat his daughters to death. But he seemed to have got over that. Nevertheless, who came out ahead after Doublehead's death? Well, Colbert did. He got a new ferry right there at Gravelly Springs, just down from Cypress Creek. And then there's Jackson. How does Jackson play in on this? Well, return Meigs, oddly enough. Doublehead either had a will or he didn't have a will, but he did say this. Jonathan returned Meigs was Doublehead's executor. Because Doublehead, that's what he wanted. His best friend and pal, returned Meigs, got to be the executor of the will. Well, we know what executor of the wills can do. They can do whatever the hell they want. And that's what return Meigs did. Doublehead's reserve, which we don't hear about, you look it up. If you see a map with Doublehead's reserve, I'll be shocked. It's kind of it starts at Cypress Creek, runs back to the east, past today's Florence, towards Athens, Bluff Creek, I think. That's where Florence, Alabama is. And how did Florence, Alabama come to be? Well, Jackson, somehow or another, came to own like most all of that land, and all of his buddies were able to bid on that land when Alabama became a state. The other way that Florence became a place, in about 1818, now this is 10 years after the Natchez Trace has been put at Colbert's Ferry. That was to make Colbert happy. In 1818, now the state is a state, Alabama, 1818. Jackson moves that ferry, or that road, right to Florence. It's called the Military Road. That military road comes straight out of Nashville, just like the Natchez Trace did, but rather than going to Colbert, it goes through Florence. And who owns land on both sides of that Tennessee River? That's Jackson and his pals. We're going to talk about Jacksonians, but this is the beginning of Jacksonians. Jacksonians were Jacksonians, and they stuck with Jackson through thick and thin, even to the point of Charles Dickens's friend, and that man being Thomas Swain, was a second to Dickinson. He actually threatened to kill Jackson in 1806, but he didn't. Oddly enough, he became friends with Jackson about 1808. So, Doublehead's dead. Jackson's up there in Nashville. He wants to get popular again. How do you do that? Well, you're a general of the militia. They couldn't get rid of that because that's a political thing. He's a Donaldson. He was a general. He's a general of the militia, which a bunch of coonskin guys that they may show up and they may not, and it's a mess in Nashville, but he is in charge of that, and he can write letters. If he can find a reason to go south to fight Indians, he knows this, he will win, and he will take that land. So in 1808, when there's a hint of trouble on the frontier being the Tennessee River, Jackson wants to know what the hell's going on and how do we get down there. That's what that letter was for. This is what drew Jackson's attention. Down around Waterloo, which was the old Colbert Ferry now, but it was still running. Colbert lived in that area. On the 3rd of April, William Outlaw comes down south. There had been an attack, as they said, on a canoe, and 3 men had been killed and a few wounded. There's a mention of the Chickasaws. William Outlaw goes down to the Chickasaw Nation, and that's where he found Nance. Well, the boat that was fired on was being captained by a man named Famous Mortimer. Now, I've looked. I don't know why Famous Mortimer was famous. That's what he was named. Now, there's some conjecture, and it's probably true. He was born in Virginia, and he had to leave Virginia. He was in the Revolutionary War, actually. But during the Revolutionary War, he was only 18. He and his wife were accused of trying to steal leather. And they caught him. In the court case, they called him the infamous Mortimer. Well, he couldn't live that name down, so he pretty much, after the Revolutionary War, went directly to Kentucky. And now he's in a boat, well, he's in a canoe, a pirogue, actually, it's a big canoe, with all these men. And they're either, it sounds to me like they're coming back from the trace. They've probably traveled to the trace, and now they're bringing stuff back, or either they're taking it down. It doesn't really say for sure. We know this. The problems happened between Bear Creek and Panther Creek. We know this because George Colbert, the chief of the Chickasaws, his brother was Levi, and Levi got shot at too. And Levi witnessed all these things. And Levi Colbert said that those were 13 creeks. Because if they were 13 Chickasaws, there would be a problem. And so the fix began. I don't know if Jackson was in on it. It sounds to me like they're kind of writing between the lines there. We're just not reading it the way they read it. The Chickasaws were our allies. We were using their land. They were the good Indians. Now, there were only like 5,000 of them. This is a tight-knit little group of Indians. There's 25,000 Cherokees. 5,000 Chickasaws? We're scared of 5,000 Chickasaws? Apparently so. These were very good warriors. I'm part Chickasaw, so anyway, that's what I like to. Nevertheless, anyway, Levi Colbert explains who they are, and then the rest of the story continues on that the 13 Chickasaws, the squaws, 13 squaws, went downriver up towards Dover to get gunpowder. They couldn't get it. They got surly and got mouthy. Something generally squaws don't do. They're usually quiet. Now, I know the women in our family aren't that quiet, but these, in fact, this sounds like my family. So we're told in 1808 by Stephen, who had gotten caught raiding McGee's whiskey barrel. He tells the facts of the matter. Why they're up there. They're spying. The squaws were sent to find out what's the lay of the land. Who sent them up there? Well, the Shawnee chief, Tecumseh, you've heard of him, but he had an alcoholic. I know this is overplayed, but he was. He was the prophet. He was Tecumseh's younger brother. He wasn't a very capable Indian. He just wasn't. He put his eye out shooting an arrow, a bow and arrow. Now, Indians are supposed to be like, they're born with a bow and arrow. He put his eye out with an arrow, and then he's an alcoholic. The Klan didn't much care for him, but one day he fell out, probably didn't have whiskey and went into the DTs. I don't know. He woke up, and he said he had a vision from God, and he's got a way to keep us from getting hurt by bullets. And so what happened was Tecumseh in 1808 began a mission of let's get people on our side. Let's get the Creeks, let's get the Choctaws, let's get the Chickasaws, let's talk to the Cherokees. He began looking now for all of those things, and he's talking to the English, who is in the background of this. This is 1808. England is trying to take America again. They're looking for a reason to get rid of America and take it back over. James Madison, the new president, won't bite, even though they keep taking our men and pressing them into service. So there's Nance. She's seen Doublehead's been killed. You got Tecumseh trying to form a alliance. She likes it. She's part of the Chickasaw group, but she's probably not happy with the Colberts, so she's probably kin to them. The truth is, Levi Colbert probably knew Nance pretty well. Very well, that she could have been pretty close kin. Could have been a daughter, could have been a cousin, could have been a niece. This could have been George Colbert's daughter for all I know. It's not like they wrote it down. They didn't have a written language. Nor did they have a calendar per se. They didn't say June, July, or August. They say when the leaves grow thick. Well, when the leaves grow thick up north, it's much different than down south. So if Nance and Stephen said when the leaves grow thick, and they thought, well, that'll be May here, it got warm, I don't know. But it wasn't July. Colbert's Ferry has been moved down or upriver towards Gravelly Springs, today's Gravelly Springs, which we'll talk about later. But they didn't close the trail that went to the old ferry. That was Pea Ridge. It comes directly out of Tennessee. As it comes down, it follows that ridge, and off to the right at some point before Waterloo, you look to the right, you see the Tennessee River, or rather you don't see the Tennessee River, because on that side was tall trees. This is cut up land. If you drop down off Pea Ridge, go towards Panther Creek, you're going into a big hollow with ravines and creeks and a great place to hide moonshine stills and Indians. And if you see a beaver trapper, you get rid of him by saying the beaver are better down the. So Nance is in Panther Creek, and every once in a while people are dropping off Pea Ridge to come visit, and they don't like it. And this has probably been going on a little bit more every year. And as Doublehead died in 1807, there's even more, because everybody knows the Chickasaws are our friends. So if you're a beaver trapper, hunter guy, you go look for the beaver. And the beaver could have been at Panther Creek. Well, she didn't want him to kill their beaver. They liked their beaver. Thank you very much. There's one more thing about this time period. It's well recorded. The founder of Waterloo was Gabriel Bumpus, Dr. Gabriel Bumpus. He was a huge man. If you saw Walking Tall, that would be my idea of, well, the doctor. He came out of Abbeville, South Carolina before 1800. Apparently he brought a whole crew with him. They all got together because the road was dangerous. They went from Abbeville, South Carolina, through a place called Seneca, through Knoxville, up to Nashville, and then they dropped down. And somehow or another they ended up in Giles County in 1807. Giles County was just being formed. Bumpus was also the father of Giles County, one of the founders. He was at that courthouse. He even sent a letter to Madison to get the town named Pulaski after a Polish general. Makes no sense. Anyway, you can read just about any book about the history of Alabama and Tennessee, and somewhere there's going to be a sentence that says, in 1807, Gabriel Bumpus and some others formed the Bumpus Trail and traveled down to today's Waterloo, 1807. And when he got to Waterloo, they didn't just sit there. They looked left, right, and center. This was good land. They liked it. They had to go to Panther Creek. They probably were taken there by one of the Colberts. It could have been Nance's uncle, and that probably infuriated her. I don't know, but there's more to this story than just a bunch of squaws and a drunk Cherokee, a Creek, Stephen guy. So they get to Waterloo, and the Chickasaws are there. And there's no way Gabriel Bumpus did not go talk to the Chickasaws. It's not polite to go on somebody's land, because this was Chickasaw land. Even the Colberts had to know this is not good. But they couldn't kill him. If they'd have killed him, Jackson would have been on them. They knew that. So they were probably led to Panther Creek by one of the Colberts, and that probably inflamed the situation with Nance. Now, whether she was a daughter, niece, cousin, we don't know. We do know this. In the spring of 1808, as the leaves were growing full, Nance and her crew of 13 decided we're going to do something to start a war. She can cause a war between the Chickasaws and the Americans, but they can be pushed back, because she actually believes that 5,000 Chickasaws, and how many, that would probably be like 2,000 warriors, who knows, not enough. Jackson had thousands of horsemen and guns. The Chickasaws knew that. They weren't stupid people. Now, the Cherokees, rather not the Cherokees, the Doublehead had problems, but he was dead. So one more thing, the other thing that draws my attention to this time, 1808. Oddly enough, it happened in the 1970s. My sister was instructed to make a board that explained the home place on Panther Creek, the date it was built, and the people that built it and their children. And that would be Jasper Parker and all of his children. And that date was 1809. Nobody argued about it. Nobody asked about it. Nobody really knew that's a problem. Alabama wasn't a state until 1818. Lauderdale County was formed in 1818, so actually there shouldn't have been anybody there in 1809. Was the house there? I'm told that house was built in 1809. I don't know if Aunt Annie meant that or something else. It's hard to tell with old folks, but it's what she heard. Somebody said 1809. It's an oddity. 1809 on Panther Creek. The dust-up in 1808 actually turned into nothing. The Shawnees never came down, the creeks never came up. The 13 squaws just disappeared. I don't know if they went back to Panther Creek. I don't know if they went across to the west side of the Tennessee. I kind of think they did, across what today is Humphreys County. They're somewhere out there, and I think the Colberts sent them away. There's no way after shooting at Uncle Levi are you going to be living on Panther Creek. You had to go. 4 years later, and this is odd, April the 3rd, 1808, and 4 years later, April the 3rd, 1812. Stephen and a band of 20 robbed McGee of the whiskey, burnt their house down, tore the beds apart. They killed the cattle. Indians hated cattle. They hated cattle. They liked deer, they liked all that. That's where they made a mistake. The Red Sticks did it in the War of 1812, which is what this is about now, fixing to be the War of 1812. They slaughtered all of the cattle in Alabama, and then when they went, they had no food. Also, they never cleaned their guns. They get 1 or 2 shots out of that thing, and they don't clean their guns. Again, they had no written language. They had no calendar. They used rocks. They didn't use it. They were going to lose this war. So in 1812, April, Nance and Stephen make an attack on the Tennessee River. I'm kind of thinking they thought the Shawnees would be right there with them. It had been a planned thing when the leaves got thick. And again, down in Alabama on April the 3rd, a lot of times, it almost looks like May. In fact, most times it does. The leaves have already come out. They're thick, but up in Ohio where the Shawnees were, it's still cold as hell. They've still got buds on the trees, maybe not even that. The whole raid turned into nothing. Well, 3 or 4 months later in 1812, June of 1812, Tecumseh and his alliance becomes noticeable. The War of 1812 is actually starting. America has declared war against Great Britain, or was fixing to. They hadn't started the Creek Indian War yet. There was a murder of the Crawleys and the Manleys. It's a horrible, and I'll put it, I'm not going to read it. You can read it. So after the Crawleys murder, the Tennesseans come into Humphreys County. This is where it took place. The Crawleys were murdered in Humphreys County. Andrew Jackson sends the militia down, the General Jackson, to track down these Indians. And they're being told it's the Creek Indians. And it must be so because that's what the Chickasaw said. And they track them, and they track them down past today's Waterloo. They cross the river, they go through the Cherokee camps. Everybody's seen them, but they're gone. And no, we couldn't stop them. We couldn't save. Miss Manley was Miss Manley, I think. She was captured. And you don't want the Indians to have your women folk or babies or, anyway, the Creeks took her back. So they tracked them back down to the Creek Nation. They killed those Indians and took Miss Manley home. And the Tennesseans now are embroiled in the War of 1812, and the Creek Indians are a threat, and the Shawnees are a threat, and the Chickasaws are our allies. So this was the catalyst for Jackson to raise the militia, and he did, and he was headed south. Now, he had no authority from the federal government to do it, actually. He wanted the federal government to support him in this, which means they would help send food and clothing and whatever the militia needed. The problem was James Madison, the president, was tied up with the War of 1812, which was basically at the beginning up in Canada, which was a fiasco. We should have taken over Canada, but we lost badly. And it really looked like, well, we're in a lot of trouble. Washington, D.C. gets burnt and all this. And the only good thing was Andrew Jackson. He was winning wars, winning battles anyway. And so all the focus would become down on Jackson. And he went down to the Creeks and he beat the hell out of them. That's why David Crockett got mad, because he didn't just beat them, he burned them. But these were, at this point, we're talking about terrorists. When you're cutting off babies' heads and burning them and raping, indiscriminate killing. Now, would the pioneers do it too? At this point they would. The gloves came off. So when Jackson was fighting the Creeks, there was no, let's save them. This was burn them to death. And they did. And they killed the Creeks. And then they turned around, went down towards Florida. He basically scared the hell out of the Spanish. We got Florida. Comes through Alabama, lower Alabama, Mobile. And then all of a sudden he's in New Orleans and he's fighting that battle, and everybody knows about that. You can hate Jackson, but if you live in the Southeast, you owe him a debt. He took the land and he sent their ass away. So you can move off and let them have it back if you want to. One last thing about Panther Creek and Nance. Was Panther Creek named because of the Panthers? Probably. Had to be at some point, right? Or did Nance name it Panther Creek? Chickasaws had different animals for their clan. But Nance was probably a Panther clan, or she wanted to be that, because she was secluded and she tried to stay hidden. So what became of Nance, the Chickasaw squaw? Nance a Chickasaw squaw who had fled from her own nation and married Stephen, the captain of the party of 14. Well, Stephen was captured and he went to Dover. Never hear about Stephen again. He could have become the bartender in Dover. It's quite likely. I don't think the Indians wanted him back. But the War of 1812 kind of overshadows Nance and where she's at. Most of the war was with Tecumseh up in Ohio. The Creek Indian War was down below Tennessee River. But in between there were things happening on the west side of the Mississippi River. You can read bits and pieces of it, little hits here and there. There looks like Nance is chased out of that area around Humphreys County, disappears north, not south. She should have gone south or west. She went north, got as close to that Fort Massac as you could get. There's one last attack of Indians there. It's never really said, are they Cherokees? Are they Creeks? It's like an amalgamation of losers. And they killed, and they basically did what happened to Crawley and Manley. They disappear. Again, the war is over and we hear nothing about them. And I'm supposing they headed towards today's Memphis and probably crossed the Mississippi into Arkansas. And we'll discuss that later. Arkansas is a whole different game. After the War of 1812, which ended in 1814, everything changed. We got a lot of land, and Jackson obviously owned a bunch of it. Whether that's legal, I don't know. It was then, and it probably is now. Politicians seem to get away with anything. Just make a law. Or blame it on somebody who said something about your wife and kill them. It doesn't matter. And was that scar on his head from the British officer? I mean, I like Andrew Jackson and everything, but some of these things need to be answered, and they never will be. After the War of 1812, in 1819, Dr. Gabriel Bumpus and his partner placed an ad in the newspaper, advertised their new town. These towns were big business. You wanted people to come to your town. You wanted them to buy the land, and you wanted it to become a commercial success. And according to Gabriel Bumpus, and I'll read some of this. First, because it is one of the best watered spots in the world, abounding with springs, branches, and creeks, which run cool and fresh throughout the year. Second, because many of these waters are calibrate and come from gravelly iron, rusty red, the hills, and pass in channels of the same description. Thirdly, it is below the shoal. The shoals could be a problem if you're trying to go upriver or coming downriver. The shoals were these mussels, shells that had developed over hundreds of years in like little rivulets of them that ran the length of the Tennessee. If it got too low, your boat couldn't go over the shoals. And as you get close to Florence, actually Florence is really where it gets the worst, and Florence is like the dead end where you can get there. Waterloo is a little bit higher up. Gabriel Bumpus, he wants boats, flat boats, have access to Waterloo, the landing, and he continued. It is here the waters rest from their labor after passing more than 50 miles, dashing and foaming over rock, a smooth current, deep and narrow channel. It is here the water is throwing off the whole length of the shoals and is sure it's to be sufficient to float a boat. The last reason we shall assign, and which alone should be sufficient, is that, underline this, several families have resided near this spot for the last 2 seasons. Now it's 1819. Somebody's been there since 1817. Perfectly exempt from the ordinary diseases of the river. And so you ask, what about Doublehead? Here's what about Doublehead. It's 1817. Somebody's down in Waterloo. Somebody's not supposed to be there. Waterloo doesn't open up until 1819. And that's why Bumpus put out the article in 1819. Now, he's irritated about this, you just can't tell. There's been somebody there for 2 years, and they've been buying land, they've been carving up trees. So, Bumpus is not amused. And who else is there? Well, John Webb's there. We know this because Artemus Parker married John Webb's daughter in 1822. And that's the Artemus that's in the one-page will in 1817, January 1817, when he was given a horse called Doublehead. Here's my theory. Artemus is 17 or 18, he's got a racehorse. He races down the creek Bumpus Creek, burst out of the trees, and right there on a hill to the right, as you go towards Waterloo, is John Webb and his big cabin. So, Doublehead the racing horse was in Alabama in 1817, almost without a doubt. This is from the Democrat Clarion and Tennessee Gazette, Nashville, Tennessee. Tuesday, May 26, 1812. Now this is days after the Crawley-Manley massacre. An affidavit is sent to Tennessee reporting on the fact. Now there's mentions of Humphreys County, the courthouse. That's where the massacre took place. It was downstream, downriver from the courthouse. So the Manleys made the report at this place, and it mentions at Parker's on Trace Creek. It further says that Parker is at the courthouse in Hickman County. Hickman County is just over, and that's where the Parkers were. Is this our Parkers? I think it is. It may not be exactly Thomas and his sons, but I think it's either an uncle or someone. They're all building courthouses. It mentions the Parkers. It mentions a man named, I think it's Captain Jarman. He'll come into play in this story. And it mentions one more man. He's mentioned one time. That's Colonel Witherspoon of the Regiment of Horse. And he received orders to march his regiment to the assistance of General Johnson. Now this is Colonel John Witherspoon. Now he's going to be prominent in the next few chapters. He was not a Jacksonian. He would have been the best man to lead this attack on the Creek Indians. He had actually been in the Revolutionary War. He had gotten cut by a British officer, but he had killed that British officer, and he had the scars to show it on his chest. He was the real deal. Andrew Jackson wanted to be Colonel John Witherspoon, but he wasn't. And so we end this chapter with Witherspoon. We didn't mention his brother-in-law, Shoot. In the Cherokee language, that's Turkey, and that's our next chapter.
It was pretty impressive, wasn't it?